The next section in the polar equation chapter is simplifying complex numbers, which you've done before. So this is a review, but you might not remember it. This is that little funny looking eye that some of you call J's, but they're eyes. Okay, that's imaginary number. And that happens when you have the square root of a negative number in your problem. So let's say I have the square root of -4. That is equal to 2i, because the square root of 4 is 2 and the square root of -1 is I. So if we look at it, we have the square root of -1 and the square root of 4, and that will give me my I, and that will give me my 2, so it's 2i. Okay? But we also need to know how to combine complex numbers, and you can either add them, subtract them, or multiply them. So I'm going to just do a few problems and show you how to do it, and then you can start your work. When we're adding complex numbers, we will have something like 6 plus 2i plus -7 minus 3i. And all you're doing is you're adding the real part, which is the 6 and the -7, and then the imaginary part. So it's kind of like adding variables. So adding is pretty basic. So 6 plus -7 is -1, and 2i minus 3i is -I. So that would be your answer. Okay? When you're subtracting, you just have to remember, like we do in regular math, that the second parenthesis is that negative sign goes to everybody in the second parenthesis. So let's say we have the same problem, 6 plus 2i minus -7 minus 3i. Well, this minus goes to everybody, and basically you just say 6 plus 2i plus 7 plus 3i, because you change all the signs and then you combine like terms. So that's going to be equal to 13 plus 5i. So it's very different than the first one, is the second one. Multiplying gets a little bit more difficult, and I'll do it by foiling, and then I'll do it also by the box method if you like that better. So you can use whichever method you want. So let's say we have 2 minus 3i times 7 minus 4i. Okay, and here there's another rule that's going to come into play, and we already know that the square root of -1 is I, but now we're going to get that I squared equals -1. That's the second rule we have to remember when we're dealing with imaginary numbers. So we're going to FOIL. 2 times 7 is 14. 2 times -4i is -8i. -3i times 7 is -21i. And -3i times -4i is positive 12i squared. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to combine those two like terms in the middle. So that's 14 minus 29i. And now we have this I squared. Well, I said I squared equals -1. So 12 times -1 is a -12. Now that turned into a number. And so we can combine that with the 14. So 14 minus 12 is 2 minus 29i, and that is your final answer. If we did it with the box method, you make a little box, a 2 by 2 box, and you put a 2 and a -3i, don't forget your signs, and a 7 and a -4i, and then you do 2 times 7 is 14, put that in this box. 7 times -3i is -21i, put that in that box. 2 times -4i is -8i, and -3 times -3i times -4i is positive 12i squared, and then you have to remember to make that a -1. So then you add 14 minus 12, because that turns into a -12, and then minus 8i minus 21i, and you get 2 minus 29i. The last thing you're going to do is do I to a number. Let's say it's I to the 56. And what we're going to do is think about pairs, how many pairs I can make. Because we know that I squared equals -1. So if I can make a bunch of I squares, then I can have a bunch of -1s, and then you just let the math take you there. If you put this in the calculator, it gives you funky numbers on the calculator. When I get back, I'll teach you how to read those. But right now, we're just going to look at pairs. So if we say 56 people, if we have 56 people, how many couples can we get out of that? And that's 28. So technically, this is the same as I squared to the 28. Well, what is I squared equal to? -1. So -1 to an even number is 1. And now we're going to do the next four. So we're going to do I to the 57, I to the 58, and I to the 59. Let's do it the same way. Well, when you have 57 people, you have still 28 couples, but one of you guys got left out in the cold without a pair, okay? So we couldn't pair you up with anybody. So this is going to be almost the same. It's going to be -1 to the 28th times I. So that would be 1 times I, which would give you an I. When you have 58 people, you have 29 couples. So 58 would be I squared to the 29, which would be -1 to an odd number, which will give you a -1. Okay? And 59, you're going to have somebody left out in the cold again. You're going to have 29 couples, so I squared to the 29 with a I left over, because there was a guy that couldn't make it into a couple, right? So we'll have -1 to the 29 times that I, and that would be a -1 times I, which would be -I. Guess what? The only four answers you can get on these problems is one of those four answers. So you have to figure out which one it is, and then you can do those problems. Okay? Now you can start your homework and work together.